Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this edition of Defense News Weekly, Turkey is out of the F-35 program after taking delivery of a Russian air defense system. And Army modernization is taking a giant leap forward as the new Futures Command reaches full strength. We'll also sit down with presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg and hear his pitch to be Commander-in-Chief. And finally, we'll find out who in the Navy is getting their flight hours cut. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. This week we've got a lot to dig into, from Army modernization to presidential politics to the amazing story of this year's Marine of the Year. But first, here's our top news of the week. The new Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, General David Berger, has released his planning guidance for his expected 4-year tenure atop the service, and it previews some fundamental changes for the Marine Corps. Included in that change is a shift in how Marines are trained and educated, a reorientation towards how the Corps fights, and a focus on eliminating misconduct within the ranks. Another key point from his guidance was that 38 amphibious ships will no longer be the guiding principle of the amphibious fleet, and that the Corps must adapt to meet future threats and needs of the future. A Japan-based destroyer, originally sidelined by a fatal collision in 2017, has had its return to the fleet delayed by a new issue which arose during testing. Navy maintenance experts found that the port shaft of the USS John S. McCain is out of alignment, likely because of that 2017 collision that killed 10 sailors. A misaligned shaft can mean that the bearings that support and turn the shaft are out of sync, which is more easily fixed, or that the shaft itself is warped, or that the main reduction gear is out of alignment. Although it's unclear what exactly the problem is with the shaft, adjustments are scheduled to be done by this October. And the U.S. Air Force's competition for new intercontinental ballistic missiles has moved on to the next stage after the service released a request for the weapon system's first 5 production lots. The contract for the Engineering, Manufacturing, Development, or EMD phase of the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, or GBSD, is expected to be awarded later in 2020 to one of 2 companies, Boeing and Northrop Grumman, which are both involved in the current phase of development. While the ultimate cost of the program is unclear, the GBSD will replace Minuteman III ICBMs, which have had few upgrades since being fielded in the 1950s and 60s. And the U.S. Navy is having to cut flight hours of several squadrons on the East Coast because of a $100 million budget shortfall. Hit hardest will be helicopter squadrons, as they'll lose 25% of their flight hours. In addition, patrol, test, and support units are set to lose about 10% of their hours. According to a naval aviation official, the shortfall was caused by greater than anticipated usage of P-8 patrol planes, which will have to be accounted for in the future. This week marks a huge step forward for the Army's newest organization, Army Futures Command. As their commander announced, they'll be fully operational starting on July 31st. The command, which centralizes all Army modernization under a 4-star general, is based in Austin, Texas, and is working to vastly speed up the purchase and development of new equipment. At a news conference at the Pentagon, the unit's leader, General Mike Murray, laid out what's next.
And as most of you would suspect, the Army didn't give me a year off to kind of sort it out before they started asking things from me, so I think we have actually been executing the mission that we've been given for at least the last 6 to 8 months, if not longer. So that's why I'm very, very comfortable saying 31 July will be fully operational.
This week also marked the suspension of Turkey's participation in the F-35 program, as the Middle Eastern country has now taken delivery of a Russian S-400 air and missile defense system. In a news conference at the Pentagon, defense leaders explained what's next. Here's some highlights.
As President Trump said in his statement today, the U.S. still values our strategic partnership with Turkey. The Department of Defense and the U.S. government more broadly have worked very hard to chart an alternative path that would enable Turkey to acquire air defense systems within NATO alliance standards for interoperability and still allow Turkey to remain within the F-35 partnership. All Turkish F-35 students and instructor pilots currently in the United States have firm plans to leave the country. Roughly 20 Turkish personnel at the Joint Program Office will no longer retain access to JPO spaces. These actions to remove Turkey from the F-35 program are intended to mitigate risks to the F-35 and are separate from any congressionally mandated Russia-related sanctions under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CATSA.
Capitol Hill saw some fireworks this week as Army Secretary Mark Esper faced the Senate for his confirmation hearing to be Secretary of Defense. One key moment was when Massachusetts Senator and presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren questioned Dr. Esper on his past work at Raytheon. Here's a look at that exchange.
If you're confirmed, will you do the same and commit to extending your recusal from any and all matters involving Raytheon for the duration of your tenure as Secretary of Defense?
You know, Senator, we had this discussion in your office.
Yes, we did.
We had this discussion a couple years ago. You know, on the advice of my ethics folks at the Pentagon, the career professionals, no, the recommendation is not to. The belief is that the screening process I have in place, all the rules and regulations and law that I'm
So let's just cut to it. You're not going to do what Acting Secretary Shanahan agreed to do, and that is agree not to be involved in decisions involving your former employer where you were head lobbyist for the duration of your time as Secretary of Defense.
Senator, I can't explain why he made that commitment. We obviously come to the... He was...
but you are not willing to make the same commitment. Is that right?
He was fulfilling a different role than I am, and he obviously...
You are unwilling to make that same commitment. Is that right, Dr. Esper?
He has a different professional background than I do.
I'll take that as a yes, you're unwilling to make that commitment. That is not the only ethics problem with your nomination. Part of the deal you got from Raytheon when you left as their top lobbyist was at least $1 million in deferred compensation after 2022. Now, the law prohibits you from participating in matters that would affect Raytheon's ability or willingness to hand you this massive payout. But there's a catch. In a recent memo, you detailed an exception to your ethics obligations by writing that you can get a waiver to participate in matters that directly and predictably affect Raytheon's financial interests if it's, quote, so important that it cannot be referred to another official, end quote. This smacks of corruption, plain and simple. So here's my question. Will you commit that during your time as Defense Secretary that you will not seek any waiver that will allow you to participate in matters that affect Raytheon's financial interests?
Well, Senator, let me correct the record with regard to what you said. At any time in the past 20-some months, to include the last 3 weeks, did I request or seek or receive or be granted any waiver?
I appreciate, Dr. Esper, that you have not in the past asked for one, but you're the one who has detailed an exception to your ethics obligation by saying that you can seek a waiver in the future. And so I'm asking, if you're confirmed, will you agree not to seek such a waiver? I think it's a fair question. It's a yes or no. But I understand you have not asked in the past, so I'll ask my question again. Will you agree not to ask for a waiver during the time you serve as Secretary of Defense?
No, Senator, I won't, because I'm going to continue to abide by the rules and regulations, and I'm going to...
Thank you.
And I'm going to continue to consult closely with my ethics personnel to ensure that we stay in the ethical midfield.
I recently introduced legislation to block the revolving door between the Pentagon and giant defense contractors like Raytheon by prohibiting big defense contractors from hiring former senior DoD officials for 4 years after they leave government. If it were the law, you couldn't go back to work at Raytheon or any other defense contractor immediately. In other words, it would help close the revolving door. If confirmed, will you commit not to work for or get paid by any defense contractor for at least 4 years after your government service?
No, Senator, I will not.
All right, so let me get this straight. You're still due to get at least $1 million payout from when you lobbied for Raytheon. You won't commit to recuse yourself from Raytheon's decision. You insist on being free to seek a waiver that would let you make decisions affecting Raytheon's bottom line and your remaining financial interests. And you won't rule out taking a trip right back through the revolving door on your way out of government service, or even just delaying that trip for 4 years after you leave government. Secretary Esper, the American people deserve to know that you're making decisions in our country's best security interests, not in your own financial interests. You can't make those commitments to this committee. That means you should not be confirmed as Secretary of Defense.
Senator, if I may answer your question. At the age of 18, I went to West Point, and I swore an oath to defend this Constitution. And I embraced a motto called duty and honor and country. And I've lived my life in accordance with those values ever since then. I went to war for this country. I served overseas for this country. I've stepped down from jobs that paid me well more than what I was working anywhere else. And each time it was to serve the public good and to serve the young men and women of our armed services. So no, I disagree. I think the presumption is, for some reason, anybody who comes from the business or the corporate world is corrupt.
So I'm asking the question. No, this is not right, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sullivan
I didn't ask a question
Senator
at the end.
Sullivan's, you've gone 2 minutes over.
No, I haven't gone over.
Yes,
He
you
has
have.
gone over. And he
Senator
is
Sullivan,
not willing to make a commitment that he will not engage in conflicts of interest
Thank you,
for
Mr.
the
Chairman.
company for which he was a lobbyist. This is outrageous.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. And when we come back, we'll sit down with candidate Pete Buttigieg and learn about the 2019 Marine of the Year. While many veterans have run for and won the presidency, none are quite like South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. The Democrat and Navy veteran recently talked with Military Times about what he would do if he was elected to be Commander-in-Chief. Here's that interview.
It's vitally important that the U.S. command more respect than we do today.
One of the most surprising storylines from the early 2020 Democratic presidential primary has been the emergence of 37-year-old Pete Buttigieg on the national stage. The mayor of South Bend, Indiana is polling among the top 5 in a crowded field and achieved a national prominence few anticipated when he announced his candidacy in April. One of the key focuses of Pete Buttigieg's campaign so far has been his status as a naval reservist and as an Afghanistan war veteran. He's one of 3 post-9/11 veterans in the Democratic presidential field this year, but he's the first since the recent wars began to really break into that upper echelon of fundraising and of polling. So we're here in South Bend to interview Mayor Pete about what that would mean for him to be Commander-in-Chief and how his veteran status influences his priorities. Mayor, thanks for sitting down with us. We wanted to talk to you because you're a gay Democrat from a town that's got a major university. I don't think that's the criteria most people would have thought of when they think of the veteran that's going to break into the national conversation. Is that wrong of me to think that way? Is that wrong to think that you're breaking the mold in some way?
People can try to size you up by your profile, but if you tried to figure me based on that, it wouldn't get you very far. I'm a millennial, gay, Episcopalian veteran mayor from a blue city in a very red state. I think it's just evidence of how you got to get to know people individually.
So let's talk about, Commander-in-Chief, not a small title there. What is your vision for what that should be? What are your priorities when you hear Commander-in-Chief? What are you going to do different from the current guy? What are you going to do different from President Trump, who is serving that role right now?
Well, I think as president, I'll have 2 big jobs when it comes to the Commander-in-Chief role. The first is to establish a higher and clearer bar for when we're going to use military force. The way that this administration has kind of casually thrown around the idea of getting the military involved in Venezuela or militarizing the U.S. border or escalating things with Iran, I think doesn't really reflect a clear-headed sense of what thresholds you do apply for decisions about the use of force. The second big task is going to be restoring U.S. credibility around the world. We have not been this badly off in terms of respect among nations, especially our allies, as long as I've been alive and quite a bit longer than that. And it's vitally important that the U.S. command more respect than we do today.
So being a veteran, does that make you, I guess, more reluctant to commit to force? I mean, we've heard a lot of tough talk from the administration, but not necessarily committing the troops there. It's threatening the stick, but not actually using it. How do you find that line between when to actually deploy versus, when to just send a stern message and remind those foes we do have a very strong military?
Well, I think part of what you get from having been in a conflict is a sense of the gravity of some of the forces they're playing with. So what worries me most about, for example, the Iran situation isn't so much the president's intentions as the competence in the White House right now, the possibility that they could initiate something that gets away from them. In other words, the dynamics over there could reach a point where the White House actually loses control of an escalation. I think when you've deployed, you understand that we have military force for a reason, and we maintain the best fighting force in the world for a reason, and we should be prepared to use it to defend the homeland, to prevent attacks on American soil or on American interests and people. The other thing is that those who served in the Afghanistan conflict have an especially strong sense of just how hard it is to end the conflict. I thought I was one of the last guys turning out the lights. When I left ISAF headquarters, that was 5 years ago, and we're still arguing over how to get out. It's a reminder of how difficult it is to wrap up a conflict once you're in one.
You have on-the-ground experience there. You know how long this war's dragged on. What is your plan for Afghanistan?
Well, to me, we can't be the guarantors of full peace, prosperity, and democracy over there. What we should do is do our part to support a democratically elected government that'll be friendly to the U.S. But that doesn't mean an open-ended commitment of troops on the ground. Sure, we can have intelligence capabilities. Sure, we can have special forces capabilities to prevent another attack on the homeland. But beyond that, I think it's time to go.
If Mayor Pete becomes President Pete, do we have troops on the ground in Afghanistan in 2024?
We got to wrap this up, and so my expectation is that we will not have ground troops much longer than when I arrive in office. Again, we may need to maintain some kind of special ops capability. That's understandable, but we can't just be there indefinitely and expect any different result than we've had in the last going on 20 years.
Do you worry that the military has gotten sucked into politics in a way that it didn't in the past?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, look, individual service members have opinions and strong ones, and that's fine. But I always knew, and I think every professional service member knows, when you put on the uniform, you put away your politics. And by the same token, the president ought to know that troops are not there to decorate his political ambitions. They're there to defend the Constitution with their lives. No matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you should know that your president only views your service as a sacred trust and as something to help defend the nation, not as something to be politicized and turned into a shiny backdrop.
Now, you joined the military after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, but you've seen the transgender. I'm sorry.
It was still policy when I joined.
So why? I mean, with your background, why did you join then? Why was that not a deterrent to say, I don't want to be part of this kind of organization?
Well, I think it definitely made a lot of people think twice. But at the end of the day, I wanted to serve, and that trumped everything else. I wanted to make myself useful. But it was frustrating to know that I could lose my job. And what was amazing after I did come out, after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, was that I heard from so many other people who are in the same boat. Good service members, good soldiers, good sailors, who were in the exact same boat, and I think found it harder to do their job because they had that extra pressure of not being able to talk about their home life the way that, I mean, what's more of a military tradition than talking about your spouse and your kids and your life at home, whether you're proud of them or whether you're grumbling about it. Just the ability to do that. It's actually a really important part. Ironically, it's a really important part of unit cohesion that only became available when we did away with Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Did it make you reconsider it at all after you joined?
No, but it made it harder.
We've got the transgender issue now and the repeal of some of the rules that Obama put in place by the Trump administration. What's the next step there? How do you feel, not only what's your position on that, but how do we get away from where we are now, which is a lot of folks who feel like they had one set of rules and had it swept out from under them, even if you were to go back to what the Obama-era transgender rules were. Right. You're going to have a lot of folks who just don't trust the institution to stick with that.
Yeah, again, it's a huge distraction for service members, even if they don't lose their careers. And if they do, then it's also a huge injustice, especially because it's being served up at the hands of a president who faked a disability to avoid serving when it was his turn. We can do so much better in this country. And I think that any institution, especially the military, ought to judge people based on the job you're doing. And if you're doing a good job, you ought to get promoted. And if you're not, there's consequences for that. And all the other stuff needs to be taken off the table. For some reason, this president thinks there's some political advantage in picking on people who are already vulnerable because of who they are. But if they're ready to serve and their evaluations show that they're doing a good job, why would you hold something unrelated to that against them?
Talk to me about Veterans Day and especially the VA, because that's been another big focus of the president. How do you feel VA is working or not working?
You know, when I talk to veterans who really depend on the VA or look to the VA for medical care, you hear two things. One is that they're frustrated with the state of affairs, and the other is that they do not want it to be privatized or replaced. You know, we have the VA for a reason, and one of those reasons is different wars have different wounds. We never would have been able as a country to learn how to deal with Agent Orange or traumatic brain injury or PTSD if it weren't for some of the work done within the VA that's specially designed to respond to those things. But the wait times are too long. The distance you got to drive sometimes is too far. The struggle to get mental health on par with physical health is not complete, and far too many people are still left outside of the system. So it's clear we've got to do a better job, and that involves bringing new tools to bear. It means using technology in new ways. Not so much asking veterans to be masters of technology, especially if they're from an older generation, but under the hood, using technology to simplify the processing and reduce these weights that everybody's subjected to. But I think we can do that without turning this over to the private sector for people to make money off of and expecting that that'll somehow make it all better.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll look at the heroic story of the 2019 Marine of the Year. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Brian Parker offers his latest tips.
According to the Federal Reserve, 1/4 of Americans have no retirement savings at all. In fact, 44% worry that their savings isn't on track. If you're already putting money away for retirement, that's great. Your future self will thank you. But if you haven't started, rest assured, it's not too late to begin building that cushion. Traditional or Roth IRAs are a great way to kick off investing and grow your money. Many employer-sponsored 401k plans will match your contribution up to a certain amount. And if you switch jobs, you can always transfer that balance to a new employer's 401k plan. Military members also have access to the military's blended retirement system. Everyone's financial needs are a little bit different, so be sure to talk to your trusted financial advisor. They can help you map out a strategy for achieving your retirement goals. With these goals in mind and a clear grasp of the course ahead, reaching the dream of a comfortable financial future is much more attainable.
Thanks, Brian. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And when we come back, we're going to look at the heroic story of the 2019 Marine of the Year. Master Sergeant Jarad Stout is the 2019 Marine of the Year, and this Marine Raider's story is incredible. A recipient of the Silver Star for actions in Mali in 2015 and a 16-year veteran, his story is incredible.
When your country has called you to serve, take a very hard look at the oath that you've taken. Realize that you're taking on a mantle of responsibility to do the right thing when it's hard. I feel that that brotherhood and sisterhood that you find in the military and you find in the Marines is strong, and it's motivating, and it's powerful, and it makes you feel at home. And that makes it easy for you to do the hard things in life.
Breaking news, terrorist attack at Radisson Hotel in the capital of the West African country of Mali.
Authorities say armed Islamic terrorists killed 19 people. Among the victims, one American, 41-year-old Anita Datar, a mother of a 7-year-old boy from Maryland. She was a global health worker.
November 20th, 2015, there was a terrorist attack at a hotel that claimed the lives of 21 people. We went to help. We were not looking for anything else but to help. And that day we got the opportunity to really put our hands to the work and help and get people to safety. I look at the passing of Anita Datar and the other victims of November 20th, 2015. I look at the losses we've suffered in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I do feel that those are, those people motivate me to want to do better, to try harder. When you've chosen to serve and you take on that mantle of responsibility, you have to wake up every day and say, what have I done today to be better, to earn this position? For me to serve, it means giving of myself to my nation, to my family, so that they can have a better opportunity to achieve, to do something that matters and is of value to them. for all the people that didn't come home, I have a responsibility to live well and to be the very best that I can be for them, because they don't have the opportunity anymore. And that legacy that they left us with, we have a responsibility to pick up and carry forward.
That's all we have time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.